shorter guy, 5'10" or so. Uh, but, taking into account the game yesterday, as long as he can catch a pass, I think we're in pretty good shape bringing in another guy. As far as Dan Bailey, I am ecstatic about that signing. I told the guys earlier, it just felt like I felt a warm presence wash over me when I heard the news that Carlson was gone and we're bringing in Bailey. The guy was phenomenal in Dallas. I remember going to a game down in Dallas against, Cowboys Vikings, and he crushed us, and the fans down there loved him. I know he was mainly cut because Jerry Jones wanted to save a little bit of money. So I think that's a fantastic move. I'm 100% confident in him moving forward. If he misses a kick, it may be a pretty big deal, but I think he's got a lot more leash than Carlson had. So very excited about Bailey. I don't know if Robinson will stick around very long. I personally, I would love to see BB or Badette come up from the practice squad, but we'll see how that develops.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the receiver position is pretty murky right now. You had Treadwell drop 2 or 3 key passes that would have either moved the chains or really swung this game a little bit maybe. And then obviously Stacey Coley got some reps as well, and he dropped a pass. So not great there, and the depth is clearly an issue at receiver. And obviously for Dan Bailey, I think that's when you can get the second most accurate kicker in the NFL history to join your team, that is usually a good sign. I think 20 was at 27 last year. It was statistically his worst season, but it was right up there still, and better than the Vikings have had the last few years at kicker, whether it's Blair Walsh, whether it's Kai Forbath or Carlson for 2 games. So I liked both moves. You had to add depth at receiver. You obviously had to replace your kicker, which some I guess I had some doubt that it would actually happen because I thought Spielman's kind of had this thing where he he kind of likes to hold on to his draft picks or give them more of a chance. Where I thought that might be the case here with Carlson, but they are moving on, and I like to see that Dan Bailey. It appears anyway that he took less money play for the Vikings, play for a contender than with other teams maybe offering him more, like Cleveland, for example. But let's get into the game, the tie game, of which we have obviously mixed feelings about because, and obviously that's going to be the cliche with a tie, mixed feelings, because you could have won, you could have lost, but it really, there's both teams in this game had a 92, I believe, % chance of winning at some point, according to the ESPN probability thing. Initial reactions, is there anything like right off the bat that you think of in this game, that comes to your head when you think of the 29-29 tie at Lambeau?
My initial reaction was I was happy to get to overtime. That was the best case scenario at one point. So I was breathing a deep sigh of relief at that point. We were down 20-7 at one point and came back and forced overtime. I thought that was phenomenal. I thought after the pick that was basically Laquan Treadwell's fault that the game was over. I was ready to give up at that point.
Yeah.
But that obviously Kirk Cousins put the team on his back. What a phenomenal game. I thought that was kind of his coming out party, and was really the quarterback that I expected. I tweeted, this is why the Vikings brought him in when we were down by a couple scores and we had to score quickly. And, he did it. He was able to come through, and that gives me a lot of confidence in him. As far as the tie goes, though, you hate to tie the Green Bay Packers. You always want to beat them. But, a couple questionable calls, on either side of the sidelines, and it kind of evened itself out at the end, in my opinion. Packers fans might feel differently,
right?
But it's Rodgers' fault to begin with. So,
yeah, and I guess my initial take, obviously, I think the officiating was not great on both sides. I think Kendricks had the same penalty that Matthews had; it just wasn't in the critical situation that it was for the Packers there. But and you mentioned the interception that was off Treadwell's hands. that should have sealed. I mean, in my opinion, it should have sealed the game if Mike McCarthy knew what he was doing. This is the first takeaway I have from this game. Like, despite the officiating, despite anything of how the Vikings screwed up their chances of winning, the Packers screwed up their chances of winning. It's Mike McCarthy's inability to manage the clock when they were up 5 with 2 minutes left after that interception, and the Vikings had 2 timeouts left. And after, I think they ran 1 time in that series, and then they threw the ball twice, or maybe they had a penalty in there at some point. But like, if you run the ball there, the game's over. Packers win. Like, you can say what you want about the penalty with Matthews and the roughing the passer. If that's not called, Packers win, which that's definitely true. And according to the rules of the NFL, clearly, I mean, they're using it now in their tutorial video, so he must have done something wrong. But if Mike McCarthy knew what he was doing, the game's over. Packers win. That's my main gripe, I guess, with the whole Packers complaining about the end of the game. But Kirk Cousins, he's clearly what the Vikings wanted when they paid gave him the $84 million guaranteed contract. That's an unreal performance. Brought the team back, and it seemed like as John DeFilippo sort of opened things up a little bit more in the second half, he only thrived more. So that's good to see. Defensively, there are some holes that need to be dealt with, I think. But I will say that they only allowed 1 touchdown. So the red zone defense, I think, is still there. Sort of the bend but not break type of game style, gameplay, I guess, is still there. Rodgers got his of what I thought he might, given how good this defense is and his health and stuff. But is there anything that you specifically want to talk about or point out defensively? Because I thought the run defense for me is kind of alarming. It's not that Green Bay's been super scary in their run game in the past, and I think Jamal Williams had kind of a lot more success than I thought he would.
Yeah, as far as the defense, I tweeted out during the game, kind of in my emotional state of mind, that the defense was playing horrible because it's like they couldn't tackle. I'm like, what is going on? It looked very uncharacteristic of the Vikings defense. They just could not make a solid hit. And I was really hoping they'd lay out Rodgers a couple times. But I thought Kendricks had an off game. He usually is making tackles, at, near, or behind the line of scrimmage. He was making tackles like 8 yards downfield. And maybe that comes back to the Packers offensive line getting away with a few holds that I thought were pretty blatant. Again, they're going to argue me there as well. But I think it was just an off game for the Vikings defense. I don't really know. I can't put my finger on one thing in particular. I thought Mackenzie Alexander had an off game too. He had a couple good plays and a couple of really bad plays. But just an off day. I'm not sure if there's anything you saw or not, but they could have played a whole lot better.
Yeah, I think part of it is honestly the timing Rodgers has with especially Devontae Adams and then Randall Cobb too on a couple plays. I think if your timing is that good, it's very difficult for defensive backs to defend it. And so I think that's happened. That happened a few times with against Xavier Rhodes and Trey Waynes, specifically with Adams. But I thought, a couple coverage breakdowns for Jimmy Graham to get loose a couple times. But I think, the Vikings didn't really give up that big, huge pass play down the field besides the one to Graham. So I think if there's anything to take away, it's that I think it's, again, that the bend but not break thing. The Vikings are good at that, which I don't know if that's really an awesome thing to take away from this, but and they allowed 1 touchdown to the Packers offense, right? I mean, they got their punt block touchdown and then the Adams touchdown. I think that's their only offensive score besides field goals. So, I mean, for as ugly as it looked at times, I mean, that's one positive to take from it. And, especially down the stretch in the second half, and the Vikings offense was bringing this game back. The Vikings did get stops when they were needed. I did not like how they handled the final drive of regulation where Rodgers had 31 seconds. And, I mean, clearly he's going to throw to the sideline, and the Vikings were allowing sideline receptions. But, I mean, I love how the defense fought towards the end, and they got stops to give this team a chance. That one right after the Treadwell interception, I mean, they took advantage of McCarthy's terrible clock management, got the stop, and gave the offense a chance. Even though it still looked like the game was going to be over, all Kirk Cousins needed was a chance, I guess. So, it's a more or less game, I think. I think special teams is really the big issue in this game. Clearly, you get the punt block, and then you get the missed field goals. So, I mean, I think Nick Olson, our colleague at Vikings Territory, tweeted out the estimated points added or lost, I guess, from the kicks. I think that's a PFF stat. And Carlson's missed kicks gave the Packers 8.3 points on average. You missed those field goals. So essentially, if you count the field goals, made, I guess, or if you want to, see who outplayed the other, the Vikings outplayed the Packers by 8 points outside of those field goals. So, I mean, they went into Lambeau in a hostile environment. For the most part, I think, handled the Packers. It stinks because it was a tie, and they had ample chances to win the game. But the nice thing is the tiebreaker, so to speak, between these two teams this year will be back at US Bank Stadium, where I think the Vikings, get a significant edge on both sides of the ball.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm reading the comments here, and Mr. Lee, we'll call him, is saying we should...
Mr. Lee, we'll call him.
Is saying, and I completely agree with his comment, he says we need to find a way to get Aloka on the field more. And I think that was proven early when Kurtz was beaten pretty bad to start the game.
Yeah, right away on that Randall Cobb pass.
Yep. So all in all, I think I overreacted when I said the defense was playing really poorly. Like you said, they didn't give up a whole lot of points to Aaron Rodgers. It doesn't matter if he's really healthy or not. He's still going to be phenomenal. So it was just a weird game. I mean, to see 3 missed field goals what are your thoughts on the field goals too? And do you give Carlson a chance at the end like that, or you take a shot or a couple of shots at the end zone? I was conflicted, with that decision as well, because I thought we should have maybe, in hindsight, it's easy to say, but I thought we should have maybe taken a little more aggressive approach.
Yeah, I think with hindsight, it's very, very easy to say, well, they could have taken a chance at the end zone, and given the kicker struggles at the time, okay, I understand taking the shot, but I think the Vikings played it the right way there. You get essentially at extra point distance right in the middle of the field. I mean, even if your kicker is struggling, you still should be expecting him to make that kick. That is... if the guy's going to do his job poorly, he still makes that kick. I mean, he made extra points during the game. That still should have been made. That's still the strategy that you should take if you're, John DeFilippo, Mike Zimmer. I have no problems with that at all. And I understand the people that are saying, oh, why don't you take a shot to the end zone there and try and score a touchdown? But I mean, hindsight is clearly, affecting that opinion to me. I don't know how else to explain it, man. If the kicker does his job, the Vikings are 2-0. That's really all it comes down to there. I think Latavius Murray. Carlson specifically told Vikings offense get the ball in the middle of the field if they could. Latavius Murray fell over on his butt right in the middle of the field. He did make the kick. I don't know what else you want the offense to do. You want to take a shot to the end zone. There's a chance there's a sack or a fumble, interception. There's all these variables that you have to account for. So, I can't fault them for what they did there. I think the execution for the offense throughout the fourth quarter and overtime, literally, I mean, it was pretty much perfect. That's if there's for me the number one thing I'm taking away from this game. Despite the Packers secondary still clearly a work in progress, is that when the Vikings can play from behind. This is something the past few years they haven't been able to play from behind. And I even tweeted something during the game like, "Oh, great! The Vikings are for sure built to play from behind, right?" And they were down 13, and put up 22 in the fourth quarter, and they had a couple of drives in overtime that had a chance to put points on the board. Kirk Cousins is the real deal. He's the real deal, and that's with multiple drops from multiple receivers. It's fantastic performance by him. When DeFilippo got going, fantastic performance by him. Offensive line and pass protection was fantastic. The running game, there's a little bit left there to be desired, but Diggs, Thielen, Cousins, Rudolph, Dalvin in the passing game, the offensive line and pass protection, all really, really good.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It seemed like the weaknesses were pretty evident, and the Vikings addressed those both today. So, what more can you ask for?
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. I mean, and we'll talk about Treadwell here because we get some comments in the YouTube about Treadwell, and that's, I don't know how you feel about him getting, like, the idea of cutting Treadwell. I know it would financially it wouldn't make any sense because it would accelerate the money he's owed over the next year as well. So it would actually cost more in salary cap dues to cut him this year than to, it would cost more to cut him than to keep him on the roster. So financially and with the cap, it doesn't make sense. But you do wonder if I mean, in camp and in preseason, he looked like wide receiver 3. He played like it. I thought he had a fantastic training camp. And it's really a shame that you see, a couple drops against the Niners. I see huge, important drops against the Packers. And now that wide receiver 3 spot is very murky. Do you trust Treadwell? Do you bring up Chad Beebe from the practice squad? Do you bring up Burdett? Do you put Zylstra in there a little bit? I mean, Stacey Coley was in there a little bit, didn't really make an impact. He had thrown out a couple times and did make, I think he had one drop and then another one that was the Cousins interception that was called back from the Matthews penalty. So, I mean, maybe Aldrick Robinson can be the difference. I don't know. It's a little bit scary thinking about what happens if Diggs or Thielen goes down with injury. Who's going to step up there and be the next target? I don't think the Vikings have a trustworthy option on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's just frustrating because, like you talked about, Treadwell was so good. I mean, you and I both saw it during training camp. He was getting open. He looked like a wide receiver 2 in training camp. I mean, besides a couple of timely drops, which is obviously his main issue going into the regular season, he's making rookie mistakes. He's looking away before the ball's getting there, and that can't happen in the NFL. So as far as addressing it, I love Chad Beebe. I've been a big supporter of his ever since we brought him in. So I'd have no problem bringing him up. I don't know what you do with Treadwell, if you keep him on the roster, if you try to sneak him off or through waivers onto the practice squad. I don't know. Or even, a guy like Coley. But like you said, money-wise, it wouldn't make any sense to release him, and that's probably why they didn't do that today. And like we just saw in the comments, he doesn't have any trade value right now. So maybe you could sneak him onto the practice squad, and maybe that's something they'll look at. But it's unfortunate that the Vikings don't have a little cap room. It seems kind of weird to say that because, man, can you imagine Des Bryant with Diggs and Thielen? That would be ridiculous.
I mean, and Des is kind of what Treadwell was not supposed to be. I mean, that's kind of the high expectation, like the ceiling, if you will, for Treadwell as a prospect. But that mold of receiver, the kind of not super quick, not super fast, not going to gain a ton of separation all the time, but he'll win the contested one-on-one battles, right? And is supposed to be sure-handed, right? Possession receiver that will move the chains if you throw at him into tight coverage because he'll use his body to shield off defenders. That's what Treadwell was supposed to be. Problem is that you have to catch the ball to do that. And I mean, the second part of that would be learning how to box out defenders, and he's a little bit behind schedule there.
A little bit. He was still getting open, which is why Cousins was still targeting him at the end of the game. Because, like Zimmer said, if Cousins sees a guy open, he's going to hit him. So it's just unfortunate he couldn't hang on to the ball. Maybe they're going to give him another chance going forward. I don't know. If I was the coaches, I would put him in my doghouse. I would definitely bring up Zylstra in the meantime, give him a shot, or Coley, or both. I think Burdett and maybe Beebe. Beebe's a lot closer to me than Burdett. Burdett needs another, I think, year of seasoning or year coaching. But definitely, I would look at Zylstra and Coley as far as getting more targets.
Yeah, and I kind of think back to 2015 now, where the coming out party, so to speak, for both really Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs was that Broncos game, I believe, week 4 of 2015, when injuries and other factors were kind of keeping other Vikings receivers off the field. And Thielen and Diggs were, I believe, like wide receivers 5 and 6 or 4 and 6. I know Diggs was number 6 at the time. They both got the start in that game, or at least had big roles. And I think both, were close to 100 yards, had 6 or 7 catches. And that was kind of the coming up party for those guys. And you wonder if something like that's possible for Zylstra or Chad Beebe or something like that, because there's clearly an opportunity for somebody in the next few weeks here at wide receiver 3. And I still think Treadwell could get that spot. The nice thing about playing the Bills next week, who, maybe it's if there's any team to overlook in the NFL right now, and it would be justified, it's probably the Bills. You can maybe experiment a little bit and try and get some guys some reps. So, I think I'm just very scared of a situation where Diggs or Thielen goes down, has to miss timer on. You'd hope to God not the entire season, and you have to be you're really thin suddenly at receiver. That's a huge hole to fill, and I really do not want that to. We want to have a trustworthy guy back there. Somebody's got to step up. I don't know who it's going to be. I kind of thought Treadwell would be that guy after camp. Doesn't really look that way right now.
So is he on the bench moving forward? What do you think happens?
I don't know. I think they're going to try and, like a rotation, so to speak. I don't know. I really don't know, because Coley, he didn't show me anything. Zylstra had flashes in the preseason and the camp. I really, really don't know. Maybe Aldrick Robinson is the answer. I'm not going to pretend to know the answer. That I think that's kind of a dilemma that when getting rid of Jarius Wright kind of gave you. I mean, it would be really nice to have that guy in the wide receiver room right now, wouldn't it?
And that's a move that I really didn't understand this offseason. He took a pay cut before last season. I don't know if he would have before this season or not, but man, we are missing him right now.
Yeah,
he's just
absolutely.
a solid receiver. Always caught the ball.
Yeah, a chain mover. I mean, he wasn't gonna wow you from the outside. And he didn't have like superb slot skills, but he just found a way to get open on 3rd and 6. He was just there for you. And it would be very nice to have. It obviously would move Thielen back outside, but this is all hypothetical. Anyway, kind of starting to wrap up here, because we wanted to keep this, short and let you guys watch the Monday night game tonight, Bears and Seahawks. So yeah, we'll try to wrap it up here a little bit. But from your perspective, I think I know the answer to this, but if there was an offensive player of the game for the Vikings, who would you give it to?
Oh, you got to give it to Captain Kirk.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Just, that deep ball to Diggs. I mean,
unreal.
Pass.
Unreal.
I mean, yeah. Well, and then later to Thielen. How did that even happen?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Just, I mean, I don't even know what to say. He was just that good. I'm really excited about him moving forward. Negatives, he had a couple passes batted down, I guess, but that's all you can really say. He tried to fire in a couple passes into tight windows that were a little risky, but if you're able to throw a deep ball like that, I'll forgive you for it.
Right. Yeah.
How about you?
With Kirk, it's like, at the beginning of the game, when DeFilippo was calling things pretty conservatively, I thought, and it seemed like Kirk was a little bit out of rhythm because he wanted to sit back there. He had the time for the most part to kind of sit back there and survey the field, and it just seemed like he couldn't quite get into that rhythm because a lot of things were called short, dink and dunk, and he was it was weird because he was sort of not a statue in the pocket, but he would like wait for someone to actually hit him, and then he'd move and make a play, which I guess it worked out for him for the most part. So I'm not going to fault him for it, but it's just something I kind of noticed. But yeah, second half, John DeFilippo opened things up. Cousins was able to let it rip down the field, and it paid off. That throw to Diggs, he threw it from his own 16-yard line, and Diggs caught it at the opposing 20-yard line, which by my math is 64 yards down the field in the air, which is incredible, and it was right on the money. I don't know, you don't get a better deep ball than that. So that's why I kind of like this Robinson signing. Deep threat, has some speed. I think he's a 4.43 40 guy. And it you can't. Yeah, you're right. Giving it to Cousins, although Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen are very solid honorable mentions. Diggs, what a stud on that 2-point conversion route, was unbelievable. Tremont Williams.
What a route.
Credit to the Packers for allowing 36-year-old Tremont Williams to try and defend Diggs there on the 2-point convert. Like, good for you guys. But this offense looks promising after, the first 6 quarters. Probably it was a little bit dysfunctional. I didn't have a ton of confidence in him at all. I did not expect Kirk Cousins to go into Lambeau and outduel Aaron Rodgers at his home turf, but that's exactly what he did. So on the defensive side, this is a little bit more cloudy given the performance, and it was a little bit kind of tougher to notice standout things. But what did you see, and do you have a defensive player of the game for the Vikings defense, or can you really think of one right now?
Based off the PFF grades, Ben Gideon was the highest PFF grade for the Vikings
on defense,
really? And surprisingly, and I don't know if he really played that many snaps, which is kind of the downfall of that grade. But I'm trying to think of anybody that really stood out. I thought Weatherly had a good game.
He had a couple plays.
Yeah. And a couple holds on him that weren't called. I'd probably have to give it to Sheldon. He had another pretty solid game.
He did.
But there was not really any standout performances on defense, unfortunately. So was there anybody in your mind that stuck out?
I think Everson Griffin's game is flying a little bit under the radar, just kind of because of the way the matchup he had with David Bakhtiari. That's obviously, if he's not the best pass protecting left tackle in the NFL, I don't really know who is. There's obviously a bunch of names you can throw out there, but I thought he held up really well, and I think I'm going to go back to Nick Olson here, our guy from Vikings territory. I think he tweeted out the stat today where Bakhtiari he allowed 8 pressures against the Vikings, or he has in the last 3 games dating back to last season in 2017, those 2 games, and then this year, 8 pressures, and then he has allowed 8 pressures against all the rest of the opponents in that same time span. So that's clearly an indication that the Vikings pass rush, it's usually Griffin over there, but if it's Hunter, if it's whoever is making him work for it. And that's still a relatively low number for 3 games, but he's clearly has to work for it, and it's not just the usual run of the mill, stonewall game for Bakhtiari. So I'm going to give some credit to Griffin there. I pointed out, it's been really tough to note this defense and the performances there in that game. I thought Trey Waynes was okay, held his own. He made a couple plays. But I think Sheldon Richardson's kind of the second best guy there. He was really disruptive and made some plays against the run that were needed because for the most rest of the game. But again, it was just the bend but don't break. I think the pass rush got enough towards the end of the game to kind of affect Rodgers. So I would give it to Griffin. I'd give it to Richardson as my 2 guys just by watching I haven't gone into the numbers or rewatched the game yet. So, but moving forward here, we'll get one final take from you, I guess, and then we'll let you guys all watch the Monday night game. In 2 months, is this tie going to hurt the Vikings more, or is it going to help them? Or, how do you see this playing out? Because I think in the long run, it's going to help, given in the division where the Vikings now get the tiebreaker at home. But it's really weird, and it's going to for sure play a factor against the rest of the NFC opponents.
Yeah, it kind of depends on the upcoming schedule in my mind. I know it's a little bit more difficult these next few games, obviously besides next week. I'm expecting thinking a win will come next week, against Buffalo.
Yeah, should.
But if we can get through these next few games with a couple of wins, and I don't really see us losing much ground to Green Bay, who I see as our main threat in the NFC North. So it could hurt them long run if we happen to lose a couple, but I think this team is strong enough where it shouldn't really hinder them in the long term. So I think they'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but I'm always kind of going back to the idea that, with you're not playing against Aaron Rodgers every week, and he was on one leg, but this defense, it allowed 22 points when you look at, the blocked punt. That's 22 points allowed, which is still a relatively low number, not quite what we're used to from the Vikings, but 22 points is relatively solid at Lambeau in a perfect weather day with Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback. You're going to play quarterbacks not as good as Aaron Rodgers coming up. And, this offense, if DeFilippo keeps it open like that and lets Cousins rip it, this offense is going to be more than enough to win a lot of games against really good teams. So I feel a lot better about the Rams and the Eagles back-to-back games in a couple weeks after the Bills one. I did not feel extremely confident about them going into the Packers game after that second half. Really like the Vikings in those games to at least keep it close, keep them competitive. And if they can steal one of those games on the road, I'd feel really good about this season because, then you got the Cardinals after that. And I think, the home opponents, it's very feasible. The Vikings are undefeated at home this year. So I don't know. I mean, it's weird trying to spin a tie into something super positive, but if it was at home, the tie was at a home game, I'd feel way worse about it. But the fact that they went to Lambeau, I thought they were going to lose the game before the kickoff. They scraped out a tie. Yeah, hey, literally Aaron Rodgers. And the offense against the Niners wasn't great. That was my opinion. Whatever. Anyway.
You're entitled to it, I guess.
I don't know. The tie it's not obviously great, but there's a lot of good things that I think to take away. And especially the way that game ended, I think it leaves more of a sour taste in Green Bay's mouth than Minnesota's mouth for sure.
Yeah, and I just want to leave a hot take before we take off here. I think Brian O'Neill, in Brian O'Neill, the Vikings have the left tackle of the future.
Left tackle?
Right. I mean, obviously, I see him playing right tackle short term, but I can see him taking over for Reef long term.
Nice. That's actually really important that we bring him up before we go here because he had a heck of a performance filling in for Rashad Hill, and we might see O'Neill start this week, whether Hill's healthy or not against the Bills. That's done, I think, because another under the radar performance that his performance keeping Cousins clean there down the stretch was huge for the Vikings. So with that. Yeah. We'll wrap it up here with the About the Labor post-game show, sort of post-game show. We'll be back next week to wrap up the Vikings and Bills game, which should be a win, we hope, right? With Sean Borman here, I'm Drew Mahowald for the About the Labor show and from VikingsTerritory.com. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the Vikings Territory YouTube page, as always. And Skol, the Vikings will beat the Packers next time at home, right?
Oh, yeah, no question.